And now for a quick review of brushes. Beginning here over on the right, if you can see my pointer, I'm looking at a number of rigger brushes, a small round, and this is a liner brush. It's a small brush with long hairs. From there I'm going into a variety of round brushes. All of my brushes are Taklon. It's a synthetic fiber that was designed by DuPont and later sold to a Japanese company for further development. After the assortment of round brushes of different sizes and points and ferrules, some are silver tone, some are gold tone. Here's a nice mop brush with a black ferrule. My brushes are an assortment of long handle, as you can see here, and then short handle, as you can see here. And actually, if I were to put all of these back, you would see that most of my rigger brushes and my liner brushes are very short handle. The bright brushes are like flats, only the ratio of length of bristle to the base is much shorter or much tighter. Brights have a very different experience than flat brushes. I have some fairly kind of in between bright and flat brushes here, and then I have some much longer clearly flat brushes, long bristles in accord to the ratio of the base. Bright is short, flat is long. Moving over here, I have some short handle flat brushes, and then I have an assortment of fan brushes. I have about 3 of them here. I don't use them very often, but I do enjoy them. After the fan brushes, I have some Filberts. And Filberts are like flat brushes, only they have rounded corners. As you can see here, I pulled out the larger one. It has very nice rounded corners, creates some nice applications there. I have a variety of them, long and short handle, and then I'm ending with a very large area flat brush over here. This is a very nice roll-up canvas carrier. I often take this with me on field trips or longer journeys where I am painting. It helps me to keep them organized. Often in the past I would just keep them all in one big bucket, but I put them in here one day for a trip, and I've been using them in this carrier ever since because I have them easily organized and I can find them rather quickly when I work. One type of brush that I do not have that is fairly common is an angle brush. It is like a flat brush, only it's cut at an angle at the tip. One thing that is true with different brand names is each manufacturer of a brush will go ahead and create its own vision of what a brush is and how it should be designed. So numeric qualities of one manufacturer likely will not match the numeric qualities of another manufacturer. So say you order a number 6 from one company and you get a 1/2 inch wide brush. You order that 6 from another company and you end up getting a very broad brush or a very tiny rigger. It's difficult to know. You have to do your research and sometimes even go into a store and look at the products if you are ordering online. Here's a nice Filbert. As you can see, when you turn them to the side, they're very flat. They are like flats that have curved edges. Here indeed is the flat. This one, as you turn it to the side, it's very narrow, nice and flat, long bristles. This one's frayed a little bit. Most artists that I've talked to, they pretty much enjoy their brushes when they're a little bit frayed. You can do many additional things with them. This round is fairly frayed, and you can even see the wood on it is warped from having been exposed to water and use. One of the things that I like to do with my brushes is on the tips, put color guides at the end there, so that when I am in the field, I can measure according to distance and space and transfer that information onto my canvas for proportions. Smaller brushes that I was using, and that they were different. As you notice here, the brush on the top, that is more a ruby in color than the blonde one on the bottom. It's a fuller brush, more bristles, and a broader handle, and a slightly larger ferrule. The ferrule is the metal part in between the bristles and the wood handle, and it holds the bristles to the handle. And this one has a wider ferrule and more bristles in the point than the other one, and the handles are nearly the same length. In this next segment, where I'm going to demonstrate the capability of the brushes, I wanted you to know that I'm using standard butcher paper here. It is just paper, it's absorbent, it does not have any glassine quality. Let's take a look at what some of these brushes can do. I'm going to go ahead and grab a rigger brush. It's a very small liner brush, and the rigger brushes were designed in the early Renaissance in Northern Europe as part of the canvas trade, when artists moved from wood panels of egg tempera to canvas and oils. It came about because the sailing industry had a lot of cotton duck around, and they found out that they could roll it up and work larger, where the wood panels had to stay flat. You can do very fine lines with the rigger, which is the design of it and the purpose of it. I'm using manganese Prussian blue here in the palette. So wood panels, to move them flat, were cumbersome and they had to be in pieces. A piece of canvas can be rolled up on a spindle and transported very easily in much less space and easier shipping. Alright, so that's the rigger brush. You can see there it does lines. This is saturated, pulled out to dry brush, little marks, and acrylic hues. This is a liner brush. I'm going to go ahead and wet it. I'm going to choose a lighter blue this time, the cobalt blue. Some liner brushes have longer hairs. Like the rigger, it's similar. You can add pressure to the brush to get more surface coverage, or you can use the point very finely to get very thin lines and calligraphic lines. Let's move into a round brush, and I'm going to take an average sized one here. This one has a different type of point to it. It flares out and then comes back in. So you can see the two brushes are a bit related. And that's kind of a bit of blue and green. And if I put some yellow in that, you'll see it differently as well. These brushes are a little bit available to do area work, not much. Moving into a warmer shade. Blends in a lot with the warmer tone of the butcher paper. They can move very quickly from area coverage like that and go right back into finer line work. They're very good for dabbing. As well as line work and area work. Let's go ahead and look at some brights. Brights are flat brushes that have a short tip to them. So the space here, the distance at the bottom, is much broader or equal to the length of the brush itself. This is a very, very short bright. I'm going to go ahead and put this back into the holder, and I'm going to get an average sized one right here. These are Taclon fiber, and they are early models of the Taclon fiber, meaning that all of the filaments, each hair there, is identical in weight and density. The newer Taclon brushes that are coming out, they're imitating natural hairs much more, and they're coming out with a variety of density in the filament itself. So the bright brushes are very good for flat, short areas. You can do edge work with bright brushes, like that. You can also do some line work with them. Very quickly. Little marks. And you can fill an area with them very, very rapidly. The bright brush is related to the flat brush. Let's go ahead and pick up a flat brush. And I'm going to take a generous one here. Flat brushes are related to your standard house brush. So you can see, in contrast to the bright brush that has very, very short bristles to the width of the base to length of bristles, the flat brush has long bristles in relationship to the width of the product. And they're flat because when you turn them to their side, they're very narrow looking. Flat brushes are known for their ability to build mass and volume very, very quickly on the surface of a painting. Let's go ahead and take a color here that will show some contrast. So I have just a little bit of paint here on my flat brush, and voila. Very broad coverage, very, very rapidly. And that contrasts from working with a round brush where I can do volume very quickly, but I'm scrubbing a lot more, and I do not have quite the control of the clean edge that I have with the flat or the bright. So you can see the chiseled look here of the bright along the edges, and you can see the formal edging when I ended the brush stroke here with the flat, but with the round, ending the brush stroke could be a little bit sloppy. very circular and round. With the flat, it's much more even and measured. I'm going to go ahead and take the atomizer and freshen up the paints with a little bit of moisture since I'm working in acrylics. I'm working on butcher paper, and I wanted to go ahead and take a look at the fan brushes. Fan brushes can do a variety of tasks, and I have 3 of them here. I have a short brush, and I have a long one as well. Remembering that using a long handled brush can create a more relaxed style because you're having less control and you're having more free movement back and forth with the brush. With the shorter brush, you might want to exhibit more control, get in closer, and do more controlled work. This is a very broad fan brush, and you can see this one is a bit more narrow. The fan of it itself is shorter in length, and the span of the bristles is not as broad as the bristles here. Let's go ahead and work with this one for today. So I'm going to go ahead and put these 2 back into the carrier. And initially, I did not use fan brushes for much more than a lot of diluted work and adding tone or stain or glaze. And the way to do that is just as I have done it. You go ahead and put a lot of liquid into the brush and create a very thin cover on the area. And then you can either smooth it in with your finger or go ahead and rinse the brush and put some more movement into that to get a nice gentle stain. Some individuals love this brush for the sense of the filigree it can create very quickly, stray marks very rapidly. Others really enjoy taking the brush, loading it rather heavily, and creating leaf-like expressions or motion expressions in the water. And very, very rapidly there, I was able to create a sense of waves or turbulence on the top of water. And you can come right back in, get a little white, put your white caps in. And it looks like perhaps you worked very hard and long to create that when actually you were done in a matter of a few seconds. You can go ahead and take a little bit of brown and then come back with the green. Start at the top a little bit, a little broader still, even broader. And you've just about gone ahead in a matter of a moment created a tree. There you are. Tree and water, all with a fan brush. Very nice. Next, I'd like to go ahead and look at the Filbert. The Filbert is very similar to a flat brush. You turn it on its side, it's very narrow. You look at it broadly, and it is very broad. The ratio from the base to the length of the bristle is often very similar to a flat brush. And let's take a look at how this is different from a flat brush. The tapered edges here provide a lot of options to go in and do close work without having to move back and forth from a round and a flat. So it's a combination of both. You can go in and do very delicate work and then put in a strong flat area of volume. You can do line work and calligraphic work all at once with this brush. You can create a line like that, come back in and fill it very delicately, tight spaces. This is not easy to do with a flat brush. You'd have to be turning at the barrel quite a bit to do that with the flat brush, but with the Filbert it's a little bit easier on the hand and the wrist, and the motion is much less necessary with greater control. Same thing here, coming in on this side. You can do some very clear sculpted measures and marks. You can do this with a flat and a round, but you cannot get the volume of coverage with the round, and you will be doing many more hand movements and maybe even have to rotate or turn your surface to get in there with the flat brush. But the Filbert allows you to go right in there. You can see that edge work there with the tip of the brush and make very beautiful sculpted marks very rapidly and easily. Of course, with any brush, you can do the dry brush, pull it out, and do very relaxed strokes for all kinds of effects. So that's the Filbert. Taking one more piece of parchment, and let's take a look at the area brush. This is a type flat brush. It's not much like a bright, even though the ratio here is short to the width of the base. It's clearly a shorter flat brush, but because the volume of the brush is dramatic in comparison to the surface that I'm working on, for our purposes at this time, this is a flat brush. Area brush, and I've gone ahead and dampened it, and I'm going to grab a fair amount of paint, and I think what I'll do here is go right into the blues. You can see here, and that's a lot of area. So with a very little bit of brushing and a very little bit of paint, I've immediately gone ahead and covered an area that was far much larger than my other samples. You can see one sample here. As you may recall, we used several brushes and several samples there. Of course, here's the round and the rigger. Very detailed in comparison to the large area brush. A travel palette that has a watertight gasket around it. It's designed for quote-unquote water media, probably targeted for the watercolor market. However, it does work really well in the field for acrylics, as I'm going to be using it today. On this side of my palette, I tend to mix my cooler colors and my darker colors. On this side of the palette, I tend to mix my warmer colors and lighter colors. I have a pointer in the upper left-hand corner here. I'm looking at burnt sienna, dioxanese violet, alizarin crimson, processed magenta, cadmium red, cadmium yellow deep, cadmium yellow medium, cadmium yellow lemon, we have yellow oxide, we have titanium raw, which is titanium and a little bit of raw umber mixed in. We have titanium white, which is a cool white. Over here I have a brilliant green, permanent green. This is a sap green. This is a phthalo green, a very kind of blue green. Here I have cerulean blue, which is a very aqua blue and a paler blue. This is a very good medium blue. It's a type of royal blue. It's cobalt blue. Here I have ultramarine blue, Prussian blue or manganese blue. This is labeled under Prussian blue. And then I have some Payne's gray here. The Payne's gray and the Prussian blue I use to control value. I keep a violet on my palette when I am using an ultramarine blue because the brand that I use puts a lot of red oxide in the blue to cool it down and calm it. And if you mix cadmium red with that particular color, it goes very brown very rapidly. Up in this corner here, the burnt sienna I use as a neutral as well as a very warm red. And often I use a cadmium orange, and today I'm not doing that because the palette is not calling for it. This is an extended palette that I just modified quickly for the image that I'm working on today. I try and keep on all of my palettes, whether I'm using an expanded palette or a narrow palette, cool and warm colors of each primary. So in my reds here, I have the type of processed magenta and cadmium, and the alizarin crimson, and even a violet as a red, because the dioxanese violet is quite warm. The cool white is the titanium white. The warm white is the unbleached titanium, which comes manufactured as titanium white with a little bit of raw umber. The warmer green here is the yellow green. The cooler green, as I mentioned, is the phthalo green. This is my middle green. Likewise with the blues over here, the ultramarine is cool, the cobalt is kind of a in-between, and the cerulean is a very much warmer aqua blue-green. I wanted to talk a little bit about the quality of this video and apologize for it. The lighting is substandard. I'm working with a DaVinci Pro board that is 11 by 14 inches, and I've already gone ahead and muddied it with some stain to cut down glare. It's a 1/4 inch board, and it's a really nice product. This is my atomizer. It can spray moisture on the surface. I don't use any media. I just go ahead and use water with my acrylics. I'm going to begin with about a 1/2 inch wide, 3/4 inch wide Filbert that has a nice long end to it. The image that I'm going to be painting has a very dark foreground that runs at a steep angle, and it's a very dark green. I'm going to be taking some of the sap green, a little bit of Prussian blue, and a little bit of Payne's gray, and I'm going to go ahead and lay that angle right in. And there's a deeper angle that runs here that is very warm, so I'm going to go ahead and put some burnt sienna in there. And since I'm working with a lot of green, I anticipate that I will have a lot of dark color there. I'm taking some artistic license with this image, and there's a distant horizon here. going to lighten that up a bit. And this area is fairly warm, so I'm going to put a lot of the cadmium yellow medium in there with the mix that I have, as well as a good amount of burnt sienna. And now also some of the violet, particularly in the bottom here. So the underpainting is just that. It's a lot of painting underneath. And I am going to do up and down strokes for the sky so that it does look flat. And again, right now I'm just working on getting the foundation in. It's a weathered sky. You may be seeing Sir Orange here to the left of the frame. He's amused by the brush and the surface and the activity on the brush. I'm going to put a little bit of orange in there, and I'm using my dirty brush, so it's not going to come out very bright, but I'm getting a foundation that's a brown on there to start things out. Dark brown, and I'm coming over at 4/5 of my bottom edge here, and I'm putting in a line. There will be a highlight along that edge in the image eventually. Another thing to do to make a point, you go ahead and wet it and then press it down and flatten it if you ever need a point on that. And you can do a little bit of that now. One of the ways you can make a point. And then go in and get the paint. And now you've got a very fine point on the end of your flat brush. Put some lighter orange right through here again. I'm using my dirty brush, but I'm building up paint surface, something I like to do. Now there's some hedging in through here that's very low and close to the ground. So I want to set that in now, just to get it going. And I'm going to use yellow ochre with a little bit of the titanium raw white. And since I'm working with a lot of yellow, I'm going to put in just a bit of violet. And it went really far with the paint, so I'm remixing it a little bit and putting in some regular white, titanium white. This is kind of orangey, but it'll get me started. And I'm just going to drop a little color there. Make that edge show up. Okay, very good. The star of the image is going to be through here, and branches that have luminous red leaves. So I'm getting some Payne's Gray and Prussian Blue, and I'm making a fairly thin mixture. And I'm going to set up the plants over there. So I'm going to just go and create these bushes. There's a clump there, and put a clump here, smaller one. And I'll put a third one in front here. Okay, very good. So for starters, I'm going to get a very, very detailed brush now. This is the number 4 I just used, and I'm going to use this one now. Alright. I'm going to wet it. Does not have as many hairs as the other one did. And I'm going to start in with the brilliant red, red-orange. I really enjoy painting in and out and again when I paint. These ones are a bit farther away, so I'm going to add just a bit of cooler red to them. There we go. And this one is a bit in the front, so I'm going to add a bit more warmer yellow to it. And it will probably reach up a bit larger, have larger leaves. Here's the completed image, and I wanted to just point out a couple of things that are going on here. We have a bright, high contrast area of light and dark tree work here. We have our focal point here of the brilliant red leaves, and over here we have some distant trees that are similar to the foreground trees. We have some strong angles running up this way, and some background information here, and the entire image is set in soft atmospheric light. So let's take a look now at the actual reference photograph and the site that I was painting. And you can see it's dramatically different from the finished product. What we're looking at here is a neighborhood yard with a school in the background, some automobiles, and the trees that are pictured in the painting are now not only trimmed, but they're without leaves, and there has been an artistic change here in the format from the trees being in the background to the foreground, and the foreground tree being here and these background trees being over here. We're going to look at an image of the subject matter and why I was inspired to look at this and paint it overall. Here is a close-up of the wintering bushes and how the late day sun captured them and gave them a very warm glow that I was very interested in trying to represent. Here we are again with the image. Here's the bright bushes. The tree that was over here that was empty without leaves is now here, and the trees that were in the background there are now over here. The strong angles are still present. The fence is gone and the automobiles are gone. One of the things that I do when I look at my images after I've painted them is I go ahead and take a very good value study of the image to make sure that I have the values correct. And what I was looking for here was high contrast in the point of interest, and a correct scale of gradation from lights to dark in this relatively dark image. It is a winter scene. The title of the painting is called Winter Garden. Another thing that I like to do is I will go ahead and flip the image horizontally so that I can get a fresh look in it with my eye. During the painting process, what I may do is use a mirror to look at the image while I'm going along. However, at the end, sometimes I also enjoy doing a photographic flip and mirror of the image. This gives me a chance to see how I'm doing overall with different compositional aspects, color arrangement, theme, the edge work, just a fresh look. Here's another thing to do is go ahead and flip it vertically. I like to use this particular angle and treatment of the image so that I can make sure that I'm handling depth correctly, that I'm getting a sense of strong foreground here going into the background. Now let's take a look at the image using the rule of thirds. So I've gone ahead and overlaid some white lines here that represent the rule of thirds. And you're going to notice that the focal point here is in essentially the center and the upper right-hand corner and intersecting at this particular power point when looking at the rule of thirds. There's also a nice strong line right here on the edge of the dark bushes next to the dark tree and a little window of light there. Looking some more using a rule of thirds, and the horizon line is on a rule of third, and a foreground. This is a dynamic angle, and this is 1/3 of the dynamic angle and 1/3 here. But the PowerPoint here of the entire image goes ahead and follows the edge of this plant. It kind of frames the brilliant white light area and brings further attention and emphasis with the color and the arrangement of the objects in the composition. This is a more complicated analysis, and I've gone ahead and recessed the rule of third lines to be a lighter color and brought in some of the Baroque star lines, which run from the halfway point to the halfway point, from the corner to the halfway point, from corner to corner, and corner to halfway point again. Similarly here, I'm working from corner to corner, from corner to halfway point. So what I'm noticing here is that I very carefully went ahead and put into part of the star work the area of focus that also corresponds with the PowerPoint area. Right here is an X in the immediate dark area of the foreground bushes. This is very pleasantly framed, this row of lighted foreground grasses, and this area here is also very pleasantly framed from the stalks up to the brilliant white area. These trees here follow the edge and stay within this area, and if I were to do a strong vertical line here through the star, it would actually break through these trees and leave these trees in one nice, very strong area of the composition. Over here, the entire bush rests within the diagonal and the 1/2 to corner area. Light can have a substantial impact on any subject, whether you're in the studio or in the field. In the studio I use an adjusting light, and here is the combined light, a white light. If I click this lamp again, I'm going to get a very yellow light, and you can see the color palette is entirely changed. And here we are with blue. Now when I work in the studio with this light, I generally set it to yellow because it is closest to the outdoor lighting. As usual with any painting, the main subject should be where the highest amount of color, the brilliant red, and the highest amount of contrast. Here we have the dark leaves and trees over the atmospheric effect in the background. This is where your viewer's eye will immediately go. The rest of the painting is support for the painting in and of itself. Everything around the focal point is designed to send the viewer pleasantly to that area and to hold them there as they gaze over the entire image. Focus on this area here to change this form a little bit, and then I'm going to soften the brilliance of the aqua blue over there. So working here, I'm going to go and use the type of fuller brush that I have been using, and I'm going to go ahead and pick up a little bit of water. One thing that I do when I'm doing corrective work or adjustments at the end of a painting, I keep my sponge fairly handy in case I don't like what I'm seeing and I have to pull it off rather quickly, because as you all know, acrylics set up very, very rapidly. So I'm going to go in and start with just a little bit of the light green, just to get some placement here. And I fairly much like that, just like that. So one of the things I'm going to do is go ahead and take that out. And what I want to do instead is put down a dark base in which to rest the green on. As you may see, I already have done here. So I'm going to put in the dark lines, Payne's Gray with Prussian Blue, Phthalo Green, and Ultramarine Blue. Alizarin Crimson, and I'm just putting these lines back in as I had just created them. This particular plant, by the way, it is in a garden. This entire scene is a garden. This is a little bit thick, so I'm going to take it out. There we go, that's much nicer. And it is a spring blooming iris that right now is at the end of the season. This is a winter garden scene under fog. Taking the brush and I'm just dragging it and I'm letting it go calligraphically as well as dry. There we are. I wanted to also put just a few more pieces here in the distance. I felt earlier when I darkened down that area that I took out some of the more beautiful elements that I had put into the image. I'm keeping these less vibrant than the foreground image of the iris. That looks a little trite and a little bit too rhythmic, so I'm going to take those out. And now I'm going to, with the green still on my brush, put a little bit of warmer color on there and bring the larger stalks, leaves of the iris forward and give it some unity and connection to the foreground colors. I'm going to run a little bit of that color right through the foreground. Okay, so I'm done with that right now, except for maybe Just a hint there and there. Very good. I'm going to move over to this area here. And the opposite of blue is orange. And this is very aqua-ish. So it should be a bit of a red or a pink if I want to completely damp that down. I think what I want to do though, instead of going aqua, is go yellow and bring a little bit of harmony there. And since it's in the distance, I'm going to take a very little bit of the lighter lemon yellow. I'm mixing it down with a lot of water, and I'm just going to go ahead and follow that shape and form and put it in there, a little bit there and there. I'm going to pay close attention to it. Bring it there and in the horizon. Just a little bit. Sometimes it does not take much at all to change something. There's a lot of violet here, so I might go ahead and create a little bit of violet. Take the dioxazine violet, a little bit of cobalt blue, a good amount of white. About this area, that's a little bit pale, so I'm going to add a little bit more of the violet into there. I particularly like this area here and here, but it did not fit to the overall composition. So when you're working, it's not unusual to sometimes find yourself having to take out an area of the painting that you truly love and even have pride in, but later find, that's correct, this particular color now, but later find it just doesn't fit the image that you were working on. And you have to go and essentially destroy something that you really created well and believe was working. Put a little bit here. Again, I like to carry a color through a painting. A little bit here. The eye is far more sensitive than I believe we give it credit for.